In the history of American crime, few burglary crews operated with the precision, sophistication, and audacity of the group that would become known as the James Bond Gang. For years, they terrorized some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in New York and New Jersey, stealing millions of dollars in cash, jewelry, and luxury goods. Their operations were so carefully planned and flawlessly executed that they seemed almost untouchable. Armed with high-tech gadgets, military-style discipline, and an uncanny ability to disappear without a trace, they transformed ordinary burglary into a highly organized criminal enterprise. Homeowners were left stunned, investigators were frustrated, and police departments across multiple states found themselves chasing shadows. But every criminal empire eventually makes a mistake. By the mid-1990s, after years of successful heists, a single misstep would set law enforcement on a trail that ultimately led to the gang's downfall. What followed was a dramatic investigation that exposed the men behind one of the most elusive burglary rings in American history. This is the story of the rise and fall of the James Bond Gang. The story begins in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when affluent suburbs surrounding New York City became the gang's primary hunting ground. These weren't random burglaries. The crew carefully selected their targets, focusing on wealthy homeowners living in sprawling mansions filled with valuable jewelry, cash, and luxury possessions. These communities were considered safe havens, places where residents had moved to escape the crime often associated with city life. But the James Bond Gang saw something different. To them, these quiet suburban neighborhoods were filled with opportunity. One after another, homes were broken into with astonishing efficiency. Advanced alarm systems were bypassed, locked doors offered little protection, valuable items vanished, and in many cases, investigators found almost no evidence behind. As reports piled up, fear spread throughout the region. Homeowners couldn't understand how criminals were getting past sophisticated security systems. Detectives struggled to identify patterns, and despite countless investigations, the perpetrators remained invisible. Among the victims was Mary Ann Healy, a longtime resident of Bergen County, New Jersey. In December 1992, her sense of security was shattered. As she pulled into her driveway one afternoon, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Her front door stood open. Several police vehicles were parked outside her home, and armed officers surrounded the property. "I was stunned," she later recalled. "My heart just sank." For a brief moment, she feared something far worse than burglary. But the truth was devastating enough. Her home had become the latest crime scene connected to a growing wave of sophisticated break-ins. Officers had already cleared the residence, but the burglars were long gone. Inside, the damage was overwhelming. Drawers had been ripped open, furniture was overturned, personal belongings were scattered throughout the house. The intruders had focused their attention on the master bedroom, where many homeowners typically stored their most valuable possessions: gold rings, silver bracelets, family heirlooms, a pearl necklace worth approximately $4,000. All gone. Outside, investigators deployed a K-9 unit in hopes of finding a lead. The dog eventually tracked a scent to a large fir tree near the property, barking repeatedly toward the upper branches. Detectives suspected the burglars may have hidden there before the break-in, watching the house and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For Mary Ann, that realization was perhaps the most disturbing part. They hadn't chosen her house at random. They had been watching. Unfortunately, her experience was far from unique. Across Bergen County and neighboring communities, similar stories were emerging. Wealthy homeowners returned to find their residences ransacked and valuables missing. Yet despite the growing number of victims, investigators faced the same frustrating problem every time. No fingerprints, no meaningful evidence, no reliable suspects. It was as if the criminals simply appeared, stole what they wanted, and vanished into thin air. But law enforcement knew one thing for certain. These were not ordinary burglars. They were professionals. The crew's reputation eventually earned them the nickname the James Bond Gang, and it wasn't difficult to see why. Their success was built on meticulous planning, discipline, and innovation. Every operation began long before a window was opened or a door was breached. The gang spent days scouting affluent neighborhoods, searching for ideal targets. Driving luxury vehicles that blended naturally into wealthy communities, they moved through suburban streets without attracting attention. Expensive cars in the driveway, large homes with minimal daytime activity, predictable routines, signs of wealth. These were the clues they looked for. Once a target was selected, the operation shifted into motion. A lookout would often position himself nearby, concealed behind trees, bushes, or other cover, monitoring the property and watching for neighbors, police officers, or unexpected visitors. Sometimes they would ring the doorbell first. If someone answered, they simply invented an excuse and left. If nobody responded, they knew the house was likely empty. That was their signal. Within moments, the burglary would begin. The gang possessed remarkable expertise in defeating security systems. Alarm panels were disabled, wires were cut, safes were opened. Their knowledge of residential security often gave them an enormous advantage over homeowners who believed technology alone could protect them. Once inside, they moved with incredible speed. Their primary destination was almost always the master bedroom. Years of experience had taught them where valuables were most likely to be found. Cash, jewelry, luxury watches, electronics, anything that could be quickly stolen and easily sold. The entire operation often lasted less than 5 minutes. By the time alarm companies notified authorities and officers were dispatched, the gang was already miles away. Their getaway vehicle was just as sophisticated as their burglaries. A specially modified BMW served as both transportation and tactical equipment. According to investigators, the vehicle contained hidden compartments for stolen property and featured numerous modifications designed to evade law enforcement. The car became one of the symbols of the gang's ingenuity and helped fuel the mythology surrounding them. While one member conducted the burglary, another monitored police communications. A getaway driver remained ready at all times. Every role was carefully assigned. Every second mattered. Their efficiency allowed them to strike multiple homes in a single day, sometimes crossing county and state lines, to avoid creating obvious patterns. For investigators attempting to connect the crimes, the strategy was a nightmare. Yet perhaps the gang's greatest advantage wasn't technology. It was discipline. Unlike many criminal organizations, they reportedly avoided drug use and maintained strict operational rules. Loose talk was discouraged. Unnecessary risks were avoided. Every member understood his role and followed it without question. That discipline began with the group's leader. Terry Lawton was the mastermind behind the operation. An accomplished auto detailer and custom car specialist, Lawton operated a legitimate business that served as the perfect cover for his criminal activities. While customers saw a talented craftsman restoring and modifying vehicles, investigators would later discover that Lawton's expertise extended far beyond automotive work. He was a strategist, a planner, and the architect of the gang's most successful operations. Lawton studied alarm systems, escape routes, police procedures, and target selection with obsessive attention to detail. He demanded professionalism from his crew and established many of the rules that helped keep them successful for years. At his side was Bruce Anderson, known as Cap. As Lawton's trusted lieutenant, Anderson played a critical role in scouting neighborhoods and identifying vulnerable targets. His loyalty and reliability made him one of the most important members of the organization. Then there was David Kirkland, known as Keith. Quiet, calm, and highly skilled, Kirkland specialized in entering homes and disabling security systems. His technical abilities allowed the gang to bypass defenses that many burglars would have considered impossible. Rounding out the core group was Walter Dino Smith. Smith served as lookout and protector, constantly monitoring the surrounding area while the others worked inside. Positioned strategically near target homes, He acted as the crew's early warning system, alerting them to any sign of danger. Together, the four men formed one of the most effective burglary crews in the United States. Their shared history was one of their greatest strengths. Having known each other since childhood, they trusted one another completely. Every member understood his role, his responsibilities, and exactly what was expected during every operation. Over time, they became more than a gang. They became a machine. For years, that machine appeared unstoppable, but success often breeds overconfidence. As the gang accumulated millions of dollars in stolen cash, jewelry, and luxury items, some members became less cautious. Expensive jewelry appeared in public. Stories about successful burglaries were shared in bars and restaurants. The secrecy that had protected them for years slowly began to disappear. Small mistakes started adding up. For investigators who had spent years chasing the crew, those mistakes would become invaluable. By the mid-1990s, law enforcement agencies across New York and New Jersey had reached their limit. The James Bond gang had committed hundreds of burglaries, leaving millions of dollars in losses and countless homeowners feeling unsafe in their own neighborhoods. The gang's greatest advantage had always been geography. They understood that police departments rarely shared information effectively across county and state lines. One day, they would strike a wealthy home in New Jersey. The next, they would burglarize another property in New York or Connecticut. To local detectives, the crimes appeared unrelated, but they were all part of one highly organized criminal operation. Eventually, investigators from multiple jurisdictions began comparing reports. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Affluent neighborhoods, disabled alarm systems, master bedrooms targeted, jewelry missing, very little evidence left behind. Several witnesses even described seeing the same unusual getaway vehicle, a heavily modified BMW, unlike anything officers had encountered before. For the first time, investigators realized they weren't chasing individual burglars. They were hunting a professional crew. Yet identifying the gang was only half the battle. Catching them proved far more difficult. The James Bond gang had perfected counter-surveillance techniques years before many police departments were prepared to deal with them. Before major burglaries, members spent hours making sure nobody was following them. They switched vehicles, rode public transportation, took indirect routes, and drove aimlessly through city streets, highways, and parking lots. The objective was simple. If anyone was watching, they wanted to know before committing a crime. On one occasion, investigators attempted to follow a suspected gang member. What should have been a routine surveillance operation quickly became an exhausting game of cat and mouse. The suspect spent more than an hour making sudden turns, taking random exits, entering shopping centers, and doubling back through city streets. Eventually, he disappeared completely. The surveillance had failed. Their famous BMW became another reason they stayed ahead of police. More than just transportation, it was designed as part of the operation. Its unusual modifications helped the gang escape numerous pursuits and earned them the nickname, the James Bond Gang. Ironically, the same vehicle that helped them evade capture also became one of their biggest liabilities. As more police reports mentioned the modified BMW, investigators finally began linking crimes that had once appeared unrelated. The car became the gang's signature, and signatures create patterns. During one burglary in Bergen County, a patrol officer spotted a BMW matching the description. A pursuit began, and for a brief moment, it looked as though the gang's luck had finally run out. Then, the BMW's modifications came into play. Bright rear-facing lights temporarily blinded the pursuing officer, while other devices made the roadway hazardous. The patrol car lost control just long enough for the BMW to disappear into the night. Once again, the gang escaped. But law enforcement now understood they were dealing with far more than ordinary burglars. Recognizing the complexity of the case, local authorities requested assistance from the FBI. The gang operated across multiple states, used sophisticated methods, and functioned like an organized criminal enterprise. Federal agents brought resources local departments simply didn't have. More importantly, they changed the strategy. Instead of trying to catch the gang during a burglary, a tactic that had repeatedly failed, they focused on the one thing every criminal organization depends on: money. No matter how carefully the gang planned their crimes, stolen jewelry eventually had to be sold. That process created weaknesses investigators could exploit. The FBI soon discovered that much of the stolen jewelry was being sold through New York City's Diamond District. If investigators could identify the buyers, they could trace the money back to the burglars. Then came the breakthrough. Confidential informants identified the gang's core members: Terrence Lawton, Bruce Anderson, David Kirkland, and Walter Smith. Investigators also learned about a Manhattan jeweler named Ron Lerman, who allegedly purchased stolen jewelry and helped move it through legitimate markets. According to investigators, he had maintained ties with the gang for years and even provided financial assistance whenever members encountered legal trouble. To the FBI, Lerman became the crucial link between the burglaries and the money. Agents placed him under constant surveillance. Meetings were monitored, financial records were examined, transactions were tracked. Every piece of evidence helped investigators build a clearer picture of the organization. Meanwhile, the gang continued growing more careless. Members revisited neighborhoods they had previously targeted. Stories about successful burglaries spread more freely. Every boast created new witnesses, and every careless conversation generated new leads. Months of surveillance eventually gave prosecutors enough evidence to pursue charges under the RICO Act, allowing them to prosecute the gang as a single criminal enterprise rather than as individual burglars. The investigation soon centered on New York City's Diamond District, where stolen jewelry could easily be mixed with legitimate merchandise. At the heart of the operation was Ron Lerman. Federal agents discovered that he maintained a private Manhattan apartment used for meetings with gang members. A coordinated raid on the apartment uncovered more than $500,000 worth of stolen jewelry, including necklaces, rings, watches, and other valuables that victims had long believed were gone forever. The discovery was a turning point. For the first time, investigators had direct physical evidence connecting the burglary crew to its fencing operation. Even more importantly, they had disrupted the gang's financial network. Without someone willing to purchase stolen jewelry, the entire organization became vulnerable. Federal agents immediately launched coordinated arrests. Bruce Anderson was taken into custody. David Kirkland was arrested. Walter Smith was arrested. Only Terrence Lawton remained free. Authorities believed the mastermind had gone into hiding after learning of the arrests. Finding him wouldn't be easy. He had spent years avoiding surveillance and understood police procedures better than most fugitives. But investigators also knew he had one weakness: his car customization business. Agents devised a simple but effective plan. They contacted Lawton and falsely informed him that his business had been burglarized. Believing his livelihood was under threat, Lawton rushed to the shop in his famous modified BMW. Instead of finding burglars, he found waiting federal agents. Within moments, the leader of the James Bond gang was under arrest. The organization had finally collapsed. Federal prosecutors quickly moved forward with RICO charges, arguing that years of burglaries, fencing operations, and coordinated criminal activity formed a single organized enterprise. In 1996, Bruce Anderson, David Kirkland, Walter Smith, and Terrence Lawton all pleaded guilty to racketeering, conspiracy, and burglary-related charges. Ron Lerman was also convicted for purchasing and distributing stolen property. For victims, the arrests brought long-awaited closure, though many said the emotional scars lasted far longer than the financial losses. Jewelry could be replaced, cash could be earned again. But the feeling of knowing strangers had watched their homes and invaded their private lives never completely disappeared. For law enforcement, the case became an important lesson in cooperation. No single police department could have solved it alone. Only by sharing intelligence, combining resources, and working with the FBI were investigators able to dismantle one of America's most sophisticated burglary crews. The James Bond gang had mastered surveillance, exploited jurisdictional weaknesses, and stayed one step ahead of investigators for nearly a decade. But in the end, the very success that protected them also caused their downfall. Confidence became arrogance. Discipline became complacency. Small mistakes exposed an operation that had once seemed invisible. After serving their sentences, the gang quietly disappeared from public life. Their criminal empire was gone, but their story remains one of the most fascinating examples of organized burglary in American history, and proof that even the most sophisticated criminal organizations eventually leave a trail. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel.